Hello guys, and welcome to a new Broken Arrow video today by me, Vulcan. Apologies for the delay, but we're finally going to be going through all of the aircraft available. I'm going to be going through all of the loadouts. We're going to be giving recommended loadouts. I will be giving tips and tricks as we go along, so it's kind of a tutorial. But let's start here with the forepost. This is a UAV, or unmanned aerial vehicle. It is a recon unit, basically, that is used to kind of discover enemies on the back line or on the sides of the map. It only has 2000 optics though, so whilst it is cheap, it also has terrible optics. And the reason that these are so terrible is because if you consider the stealth of a sniper, it has 3 stealth by default. And that means that you're dividing 2000 by 3. And then on top of that, if they're in a forest, that's another ×2 on top. So you're going to end up with like 300 meters chance of spotting a sniper. And I don't even think you can get the forepost close enough to spot a sniper in a tree line. So for spotting recon units in your backline, it's not very useful. But what the forepost can be useful for is spotting units on the flanks. I think that's probably my preferred use for it if I am going to use it. It has a low altitude optics of 2500, so it can see helicopters coming if they don't have stealth pretty well. So it's useful for that. It's also, of course, useful for spotting vehicles that don't have much stealth either. So that's what I would recommend it being used for. It does have a laser, so technically you can laser designate with it, but it's going to get shot down pretty easily. In terms of loadouts, we have the Cornet A2GM, which can only target vehicles. And then we have the thermobaric missile, which can be laser guided. It can target infantry and vehicles. If I were to recommend a loadout, it would be the thermobaric loadout. It does make it a little bit expensive for what it offers, but yeah, cool little aircraft, I suppose. Moving on to the IL-76. This is the big boy cargo aircraft for the Russians. It comes with 125 seats, a carrying capacity of 48,000, which is pretty decent. It allows it to carry quite a few vehicles. It does have 2 guns on the back. These guns, just a heads up, can give you achievements. So you get an achievement for killing an enemy aircraft with the IL-76, and there's also an achievement for being killed by the aircraft. So on both sides, if it happens, someone will get an achievement, which is kind of funny. So something to strive for over the length of your time in Broken Arrow. Regardless, 6000 optics is not really too important for the cargo plane, but it's okay. It's a pretty decent speed, honestly, for a cargo aircraft. Honestly, it's not really much to say other than that. It's a tanky beast. It can drop a lot of troops. 250 points is maybe a little bit too expensive in my opinion, but it's still the only aircraft that can really do large airdrops with vehicles on the Russian side. Moving on to the MiG-35. The MiG-35 is an interesting aircraft. My favourite loadout for this is the anti-radiation loadout. I think in general it's pretty useful as an anti-radiation aircraft. 8,000 meter range, 300mm explosive penetration. You're basically going to be one-shotting most enemy radar AA. So yeah, this is anti-radiation. You can see here that it targets radars by this icon above the shell trajectory. Make sure you have like advanced options on when you're looking at statistics. If you go into your settings, you go to gameplay, come down to units info card default mode, make sure it's on detailed. Good tip. Either way, other people do like to use it as either an air-to-ground missile platform, so you can get the KH-38M. This is a missile that targets aircraft. You can use it either by lasing it with like snipers and stuff, or you can do a strafing run, and that will unleash any guided air-to-ground missiles as well. In this case, the KH-38M is fire and forget, which means that it will automatically stay on target. There are some air-to-ground missiles that are semi-active, and that means if the aircraft gets shot down, then the missile will miss. So do bear that in mind. in this case, not too much of a problem. There is also the smart cluster loadout, which I've seen some people use as well. There's the smart bomb loadout, which I see a lot less. Whilst these have high damage, they have to be like dead on in order to actually do a decent amount of damage. Whereas a smart cluster has a decent AoE effect, so it can be useful for breaking down heavier targets. In terms of the outer pylons, you've got a varied array of options between the R73 and R77. In my opinion, just having like two R77s with the KH58 is my overall recommended loadout for 385 points. That way the anti-radiation missiles do their job. If there are any drones in the sky that your 12,000 optics is spotting, then you can take them down with the R77. Pretty fast aircraft, decent ECM, makes it perfect for the role. Then we have the Orion. The Orion is 4,000 optics, much better for spotting recon units in your backline. You can also equip it with a decent amount of weapons. So we've got the VulcanHDGaming, only able to target vehicles, but does have a longer range than the Cornet. Cornet, 1,600 meter range, but more penetration. Also a little bit more damage. Then we got the thermobaric missiles again, and then we got the smart bombs. And it's the same on both the inner and outer pylons. But my recommendation for this is to either just leave it as is for 75 points or upgrade its sensors. The upgraded sensors can just be a little bit extra help for spotting those pesky recon vehicles and recon units in your backline. But otherwise, yeah, the increase in optics is also good for when you have complete air domination. Like if you've managed to use your SEED aircraft, which for those of you who don't know, SEED stands for Suppression of Enemy Air Defense. It usually implies the use of an anti-radiation missile to shut down enemy radar AA. So if the enemy doesn't have any enemy aircraft up in the sky and also no ground radar based AA turned on, then an Orion can get a lot of information for your team by flying towards the enemy positions. Then we have the Su-30 SM. The Su-30 is a very pricey plane. It comes with some interesting loadouts, that's for sure. So 12,000 optics, really important again for spotting drones. One thing I will say on the Russian side, making sure you have aircraft that can engage enemy drones is super important and have 12,000 optics, because you're going to be looking for things like the Sentinel, which is an American stealth drone that is very difficult to spot unless you get like closer to it, and the 12,000 optics allows you to spot it from range and then engage with the R77s. But yeah, in this case, the Su-30 SM not going to be really used for that role all that often. It does come with 15% ECM standard, which is really handy. Actually, one thing I probably should mention is how ECM works and flares. So you have your base ECM, then every flare you drop, it gives you 15% ECM until the flare disappears. So there's a time that the flare is in the sky. As soon as the flare's like animation completes, the ECM is taken away. So I think the devs stated that it's like 3 or 4 it can stack up to, but it stacks like arithmetically. So it goes 15, 30, 45, you know, and so on and so forth, depending on how many flares stay in the air. So that's how flares work, and that's why pre-flaring is useful in certain situations. So there's a concept in Broken Arrow at the moment where if you start dropping flares before you get targeted, you benefit from that initial ECM. But the other thing to bear in mind is that any time a flare is dropped, it forces the missile to recalculate its hit chance. So even if you are a bit delayed on the flares, every time a new flare is dropped, it is recalculating the missile, which is why missiles can go absolutely crazy in the sky. Anyway, with that out of the way, let's have a look at this loadout. So we've got the KH-29TD, which is a cruise missile with 4,000 meter range, 26 damage. These are fantastic for destroying light targets, like backline AA even, and artillery, those kinds of soft targets. I guess sort of ATGM units, like enemy light vehicles, those kind of things. You don't really want to use the KH-29TD to engage like heavy armor, like tanks, because they're not really going to do any damage. But for any light units, they can be exceptionally powerful. Of course, you do have to get pretty deep in order to use them. Now, the other loadout for these is the CAB 1500 smart bombs. Now, the CAB 1500 smart bombs can be really, really strong, especially if they hit the right target. And in this case, you can put 3 on this thing. It does make the plane very expensive. Like, smart bombs got nerfed like way back in the beta, so yeah, not as good as it used to be in terms of value for money, but still something to consider. I have seen some people run these as air-to-air platforms, so running R77s, running R37s, running like maybe R27ERs or more R77s. Then you've got like yourself a 415 point plane with 15% ECM that can launch some long range missiles. So the R37, it's the 9,000 meter range long range missile with 19 damage. The R77's sort of your mid range with 7,000, and then R73 is 2,000. The R73 is able to target helicopters. You can use the R27 semi-active, which has 5,000, and there's also the R27ET. But the R27ET has more range, but it can only target aircraft. So do bear that in mind. I think in general, it's always useful to have a couple of missiles to target aircraft, or to target helicopters, sorry, for when you have the chance to do so. So that would be my recommendation in general for that. Now, the other loadout that you have here for the Su-30 is the KH-59 cruise missiles. So this would be the sort of loadout that I would go for if I was using these. 450 points, 4 cruise missiles. These have 6,000 meter range, and they're cluster. They have 10 damage, so they're pretty good, because it only requires like 2 of these to hit a heavy tank, I think, in order to kill them. And so, yeah, very, very hard to counter, and does a decent amount of damage. It's just, obviously, again, the plane's very expensive. So whilst you might not stop the shots coming in and killing a tank, or like the enemy might not be able to do that, you might then lose the plane afterwards, and you'd be left in a bit of a hole because of it. So you've got to be very accurate if you're going to be using these. And adding maybe like just a couple of R77s alongside that, it may not be a bad idea either, depending on how the deck is used, because then you get a chance to shoot down drones as you go. Unfortunately, because you have to add 4 of them, it's not as appealing in this case. So yeah, I think the 3 loadouts, you got the KH-29 loadout, you got the CAB loadout, or you got the cruise missile loadout, the KH-59 cruise missile. This is probably my favorite loadout for this plane, because these cluster missiles can do a lot of damage. Then we have the Su-34, probably my favorite plane in the entire game, mainly just due to its full multi-role potential. It not only has some decent skins, it also has a lot of decent weapons. Now, it only has 6,000 optics, so as I was saying before, having planes with 12,000 optics, really important. But because this is ground attack, it's less important, but still kind of useful as an anti-drone killer. I'll show you why in a moment. But 20% ECM base, oh sorry, that's not base, that's with the ECM pods. Same here actually. Yeah, you don't get any ECM without the ECM pods, sorry, my bad. It's because you automatically get the ECM pod on the unit. But 20% with the ECM pod is pretty decent. I think ECM pods are just extremely good in general. They are quite pricey, but if you're only dealing with 1 or 2 radar AA units after using Seed, then most of the time the ECM is saving your ass more than you know. Especially when you consider the flares stacking on top of it. Anyway, my favorite loadout for the Su-34 is probably the 6 cluster bombs, the RBK 500 cluster, anti-radiation, R77 ECM for 440 points. Now this is quite an expensive aircraft, but it's so multi-role, it's gorgeous. You've got KH-31s, which are anti-radiation missiles that fire at 7,000 meter range. You have R-77s that fire at 7,000 meter range, great for popping the odd drone that the Americans will have out. And then you have the RBK-500s, which are high drag cluster bombs. 6 of them is enough to kill any tank. And so, yeah, it's fantastic. High drag cluster at the moment, really, really high value because you come in at low altitude and make that bombing strike, which means that your opponents that are using semi-active radar AA are a lot less likely to be able to hit you, because you'll be like breaking line of sight with high rises and other obstacles of terrain. So that's why having high or low drag is, high drag in this case, is really important. Now, the way that you tell if a unit can, or a bomb can be dropped at high or low altitude is the shell trajectory here. So high drag means that the bomb falls behind the plane because it has a high amount of drag, meaning that it explodes behind the plane as the plane goes forwards. Then you have something like, let's see, the Fab 250s. These are just normal bombs, and they can't be dropped at low altitude because the bomb will carry on moving at the same speed as the aircraft, meaning it would end up blowing up underneath the aircraft and killing the plane in the process. So high drag bombs are used at low altitude, normal bombs are used at high altitude. So other loadouts, the Fab 3000 is very fun to use. This was something that I used a lot for a while, just great for smashing large groups of soft units. Not so good against units in buildings actually, although if it hits a building directly it will probably destroy it. Then we have the Cab 1500 variant, which some people like to use. For 500 points, you've basically got a better Cab 1500 variant than the Su-30. So if I set it up similar, no, I mean, we can't even really set it up too similar. The closest thing would be something like that. But this is 15% ECM to R77s with 3 Cab 1500s. For 505 points, 15% ECM. This is 20% ECM. You even get a laser designator, which is handy for pointing them on target. Although I will say, even though this is a guided bomb, it doesn't, like, or a smart bomb, they're called, you don't need to use a laser. So you can press P 3 times, left click 3 times, and it will drop the Cab 1500s in 3 different locations. You don't have to like laser them all onto the same target, which is what makes them really effective. There's also the Cab 500 smart bombs you can use. There's the ODAB 500 thermobaric bombs. Now these have to be dropped from high altitude, but they do 75 damage, which is pretty huge. They're fantastic for wiping out infantry and light targets. You have the Fab 500, which is a high drag, high damage, low like altitude bomb. Very, very strong. This can even kill heavier tanks because it is that strong. And you got the cluster loadout that I showed you already. There's incendiary loadout, which is great for killing infantry and buildings and just like generally clearing out forests. The Fab 250 loadout with 18 bombs, it's okay. I wouldn't necessarily recommend it. And then there's also the ability to use the KH-59 cluster cruisers on this, as well as the KH-38 ML air-to-ground, which is the fire and forget air-to-ground missile. So there's just so many options here. Like you can run a 4 cruise missile variant or a 3 cruise missile variant with just ECM pods for 400 points. Pretty good value, honestly. Then you've got like the air-to-ground variant with the missiles, so you can run like 3 sets of KH-38 MLs and just do awesome 6 missile strafing runs for 360 points is actually really good value again. This does require you to have good recon in order to make it worth it. I like getting the seed in position to shut down enemy air defense and then use like the Orion to spot the enemy and then bring this in. It's a lot harder to do on the Russian side because your drones are just worse, but it is still sometimes a valid strategy. But I think in general, with the Su-34, loadouts that include the anti-radiation are my favorite. That's not to say that other loadouts aren't worth bringing, but yeah, in general, it's I think helps you survive, because the KH-31 kind of distracts any remaining AA units, and then you have the ECM to kind of brush off any other missiles that manage to slip through. So yeah, really, really cool. With the Su-34, I have started basically doing it with the cluster, anti-radiation, a couple of R-77s, and then ECM pods. Because running R-77 with ECM pods, actually, would it be cheaper maybe to do it that way? Technically 5 points cheaper to run R-77 and ECM pods that way. So yeah, there you go, 435 points would be the way to do it. Cool. But yeah, otherwise options of R-77s and R-73s. R-73s are the short range. Generally don't want to be using this for killing helicopters, but since you are using high drag bombs, having R-73s is nice, because you're going to be floating quite close to the front line where the enemy helicopters would be hanging out. Generally though, most of the time, I think American helicopters are not necessarily on the front line, they're more like on the flanks, especially if you think about things like Comanches and such. So anyway, that's all something to think about. Lots of interesting bombs. Su-34, really cool aircraft. And we have the Su-35S, probably one of the best air-to-air in the game. It gets 20% ECM with the ECM pods. And I really, really like running double R-37 loadouts. So I like running R-37 with R-77s, R-37 with R-77s, and then a couple of R-73s with ECM pods. That's for 445 points. It's giving you a 20% ECM plane with 4 long-range missiles. That's 9,000 meter range. And the nice thing about the Su-35, because you are using them on 2 different slots, is they can ripple fire. So instead of having like a large time between firing each R-37, you fire one, wait a couple seconds, fires a second, wait a couple seconds, fires a third. Whereas if you were to like fire, like if I only had say 2 of them in a loadout like this, then it takes longer for these R-37s to fire than it normally would if you had 4 of them. So yeah, I like running 4 R-37s on this thing. There is of course multiple loadouts. You can add fuel tanks. Oh, that's actually something I should probably mention, is the way that fuel works. So fuel is based on seconds. So 300 means 300 seconds. That's how long this can stay in the air. Adding fuel tanks increases that time. So in this case, the Su-35, it has 240 seconds default. If I add more fuel tanks, then it's going to increase it. And that can be useful in situations where you want to have an aircraft loitering for dealing with enemy drones. In the case of this aircraft, I prefer to just have the option of extra R-37s and R-77s. So 240 seconds is still a decent amount of time to be able to hover around. Yeah, that's how I like to use my Su-35, and it's quite expensive. Again, maybe not recommended for newer players because you might not be able to like micro it properly to get the value out of it. But otherwise, yeah, very, very solid. Then we have the Su-57. So the Su-57 is like a bit stealthy. As you can see, it's got 1.25 stealth. So it's gonna show up on radar a little bit later. It actually has the chance to fire first almost always if it's using R-37s. The double R-37 loadout for 385 points is actually not too bad, honestly. It can be a good plane to loiter for killing drones. It can also, at the start of the game, if you manage to micro it properly, unleash all 4 missiles and be able to dodge any that are coming its way. So yeah, pretty nice loadout. The loadout that I actually like to use the most though is a mix of the R-37 and the anti-radiation, or just double anti-radiation. I think like as an anti-radiation plane, because it has stealth, it works so well. It's also very fast with 900 speed. It does have 20% ECM, so great in a siege role. But in situations where you have like both the MiG-35 and the Su-57, then you can use the Su-57 for like air-to-air. And then you have maybe this sort of loadout where you got like R-37s, R-77s, and R-73s. I think this plane's also very good for taking down helicopters just because it is so fast. And it's not like you're right-clicking a helicopter and you're strafing a helicopter. You're just flying past the helicopter, letting it launch an R-73, then coming back round really fast because it has a nice tight turn circle, and then just launching the second R-73 and getting out of there. That's kind of how I would deal with a helicopter with this, not actually like strafe it unless I absolutely knew for certain that there wasn't any enemy AA in play just yet. There is the KH-59 cruise missile. This is a cluster cruise with 10 damage, 400mm explosive, 6,000 meter range. So it's basically similar to the ones that you get on the Su-34 and the Su-30. It's okay. It's quite expensive though, like especially when you start like look at 4 of them, it's 515 points. When you're getting over 500 points, that's when I start to worry, or maybe even like over 450 points. That's when I would start to worry about using aircraft. The only exception to that is maybe the EX Eagle, but we'll get to that later. There's also Smart Cluster, the Cab 500 Smart Bombs. Yep, I have seen people use the Smart Cluster on the Su-57. Again, benefiting from the stealth, it can allow it to get closer before it gets spotted, and then you get more of a chance to get your bombs on target. I have seen this loadout be used. I wouldn't use it personally. I've also seen people run the KH-38ML. I've actually personally run this before. So you run like 2 R-37s and then KH-38s. So you have the R-37 for shooting down enemy drones and long-range aircraft. And then if you see like a couple units on the ground that you just need to take out quickly, or if it's just like a one tank that's like low on health, you can finish it off with the KH-38s because they are the fire and forget, and because the Su-57 is so fast, it can get into position and do the strafing run really, really quickly. So it's a nice one. But yeah, any combination for the Su-57 I think is viable. You just got to pick your favorite, mess around with it, have some fun. Yeah, personally, my favorite is probably the R-37, R-77, or R-37 KH-58, or just double R-37. Alright, moving on to the Tupolev 160. This is a big boy. It can afterburn, which is really cool, actually. It has a lot of very cool loadouts as well. It is the nuke for the Russian side. The cheapest loadout is like 500, or I think it's 500 points. With the nuke, it's obviously 1,000. So the nuke gets 666 damage. Its effective range is 10,000 meters. If you're going to use a nuke on the Russian side, make sure that you've dealt with enemy radar AA beforehand. Otherwise, it's very likely that it will get shot down. So yeah, bring in like your MiG-35s, your Su-57s, your Su-24 MPs, whatever you've got for anti-radiation missiles. Launch those at the enemy, make them turn them off, and then use the nuke to get maximum effectiveness. Because if that nuke gets shot down, and then you have to refund the aircraft, you're just like losing so many points. In terms of cruise missiles, you can get the KH-101, which is a 50 damage cruise missile. If this direct hits anything, it's going to kill it. Just make sure it doesn't get shot down. The one thing that I would do when using this is fire like 4 of them, turn away to the edge of the map, line up another 4, then line up the last 4. And just keep like doing circles, launching 4 cruise missiles at a time, so your aircraft doesn't get too deep towards enemy radar AA, and therefore get itself shot down, which would be a nice prize for the enemy. There is the cluster one, which again is pretty strong, but you need to get 2 of these on target to kill a heavy tank, so bear that in mind. The Cab 1500 variant for 550 points is very fun to use. You can wipe out complete sectors with these. Especially on like a map like Baltisk, I could see this loadout being really strong. If you just had like some seed shut down their AA before it comes in, and then just like wipe out one of the points, it would be really, really good. There's a 2 9000 Fabs. Not a fan of these. I just don't think they do enough damage. Like for a 9,000 kilogram bomb, I just don't think the blast radius is big enough. So definitely not one I would recommend. Fab 1500 loadout is fun, and also the thermobaric loadout is really fun as well. The thermobaric loadout can just absolutely level entire cities because I've done it on Kaliningrad, where I've just like bombed the entire length of the river with one of these and just killed like all of the infantry that was in those buildings at the same time. It's like dropping a toss that just like lasts forever from an aircraft. It's insane. Yeah, but anyway, Fab 1500 is okay. I think these two loadouts are my least favorite. Cab 1500 is good. Thermobaric's fun. Maybe not ideal because it takes so long to drop them all, but otherwise cruise missile loadouts are probably the way to go. Alright, moving on to the motorized infantry. We've got the Corsair, very similar to the forepost. Basically exactly the same in terms of stats. The Corsair can get the attacker instead of the Cornet, which gives it extra range, and then it has the thermobaric missile there as well. Bear in mind that even though this is low penetration on the explosive, if it hits the top armor, it doesn't matter anyway, because top armor is generally low enough for that to get through. But the thermobaric here is better because it's laser guided, whereas the Corsair's thermobaric is not. It can get upgraded sensors, which pushes it to 2400, which makes it slightly better for spotting stuff in your backline and on the sides, but yeah, I don't know if I'm really a fan of using Corsairs or foreposts. I only really use them in a pinch when I just need another unit to spot things on the side of the map. Then we have the MiG-29 SMT, an interesting aircraft. People use these for either air-to-air or air-to-ground, mostly air-to-ground. The MiG-29 SMT is used for 10% ECM, 12,000 optics, again good for spotting drones. Very fast, doesn't have much time in the air though. So it's kind of like the F-18 on the US side. It only has 120 seconds of fuel, which is 2 minutes. Not very long if you consider that starts counting as soon as it comes on the map. So in terms of pylons, we've got the cab smart bombs here. There's cluster, there's the thermobaric 500, there's the normal 500 bombs. Both of these are standard bombs, by the way, the thermobaric and the Fab 500 there. So they've got to be dropped at high altitude. You've got the rockets, which rockets on aircraft are basically useless at the moment. I wouldn't recommend them unless you get like a really good strafing run against infantry. Then there's the R77s, R27ER, and there's a fuel tank option there. On the middle pylons, you've got the cluster, cab smart bomb, thermobaric again, so it's basically the same loadout. And then on the outer pylons, you can pick whatever you want. So I think on the outer pylons, I would always put R77s just to help you shoot down enemy drones. And then what you put on the middle and inner pylons is really up to you. You can run it as like a 6 R77 loadout, which is okay. Really cheap fighter. You can run it as a sort of cluster boy. So you can get the 4 clusters, high drag, so it drops at low altitude for 300 points. This will be enough to one-shot a tank if all 4 bombs hit the target. There is the cab smart bomb variant, which is okay. I don't really see much of a use for it. It's kind of expensive considering how deep it's got to go in order to drop those. It doesn't have any stealth to get that deep in the first place. I think the only place that the Cab 500 is going to be useful is on the Su-57 because of its stealth. Otherwise, like dropping thermobarics to kill infantry on the front line is probably a choice for sure. But yeah, that's probably about it in my opinion. Either thermobaric loadout, cluster bomb high drag loadout, or air-to-air loadout. It would be my recommendations. Moving on to the Su-24M2, probably one of the most powerful Russian aircraft at the moment in the game, because whilst like some of its loadouts are kind of trash, the fact that it can bring in plenty of high drag cluster and napalm at the same time is really, really nice. So you can set it up with like 6 cluster, 2 napalm. You can also do like 3 napalm, 6 cluster, probably my favorite loadout. So you run like 3 incendiary 500s, which are great for killing infantry and building, just like burning them over time. And then you've got the RBK 500s, which are high drag. And yeah, nice thing about the napalm is it's also high drag, so it drops them all at the same time, kills both tanks and infantry. If it kills like an APC and there's an infantry inside, then the infantry burns afterwards. You know, it's just such a good combination, and it's very cheap. It comes with 10% ECM base, which obviously gets increased by the flares. So yeah, really, really nice. There are some fun loadouts for this though, so let's go through them. There's the Fab 1500 loadout. It's still quite a fast aircraft, so you can drop lots of big bombs from like high altitude, pretty cheap. So that would be a fun loadout. Not like super effective. There's also the thermobaric loadout. Thermobaric loadout's really good in situations where you need to like clean out infantry. So you get like 10 of these and just do a nice bombing run. Again, it's a high altitude bombing run because these are standard bombs. Obviously the cluster is always good, but you don't ever really need like 10 cluster. You probably only need 6 or 4. A 4 works too, as long as all of the bombs hit the mark. 6 is a bit more of a redundancy, which is why I like to use it. It also sometimes allows you to hit more than one tank in one run, whereas you're very unlikely to kill more than 2 tanks in one run unless they're sitting on top of you with just 4. There's also RBK 250 cluster bombs, which you can kind of mix in if you want to make it cheaper. So the way that I would do that is, say we go like incendiary here, we go 4 standard cluster, and then we go 2 of the smaller cluster like this, because they're still high drag. So it's another 15 points off the top. It gives you that little bit extra damage if you need it to finish off an enemy vehicle. So yeah, 300 points again, really strong loadout. Then we got the Fab 500s. These are very good. The Fab 500 SHL. This is a nasty loadout. High drag bomb, 10 of these, 380 or 38 damage. Like obviously times 10 is 380 damage technically, but obviously they're not all hitting the same target. But yeah, interesting loadout. There's also the 250 version of these, which you can use instead, and that's fun as well. 305 points. This can absolutely smash infantry to pieces. It's not going to do so much damage to vehicles, but that's basically the payoff. And then you got the 250 loadout and the OFAB 100, which are basically pointless on this aircraft. But yeah, the Fab 250 or the Fab 500 SHL variants are very good. Cluster variant's good, incendiary's good, and then you've got the high drop variants if you want to use them, but requires you to probably combine with seed, whereas the high drag option can quite often fly without seed support and get kills. Then we have the Su-24MP. The Su-24MP is a seed aircraft. It always has at least 1 seed on it, so even if you take the seed off, like say we have it completely empty for 170 points, you always have at least 1 KH-31. For 170 points, it's not worth it because this is basically never going to kill something. It's just going to be an annoyance. Whereas if you have 3 seed missiles, then you might have enough to kill an enemy radar AA, like probably just 1. And the way that I like to use these is either 220.3 seed like this, or I run it with 3 seed and 2 KH-25 ML air-to-ground missiles. Bear in mind that these are semi-active missiles, so they're not as good as the fire and forget missiles that you can get on other aircraft. If the Su-24 dies, then the KH-25 ML will miss. If the Su-24 loses line of sight of the vehicle, it will miss. So it's going to be less effective. But there are situations where I've found these KH-25s to kill things that are like so important, just like finish off a heavy tank, maybe kill like a couple of units in the open. I've even used these KH-25s to kill radar AA that had its radar turned off because the KH-31 couldn't hit them, so the KH-25 did. Really, really interesting way to use them. There is obviously rocket loadouts you can see, so there's like S-25 rockets, S-13 rockets, S-8 rockets. Generally these are just bad. I've never really seen good rocket strikes happen. I think the best rockets would probably be the S-13 to use, because the KH-25 has a chance to miss and then just not do any damage anyway. Yeah, rockets aren't the way, but basically what I would recommend is take this either with KH-25 MLs or without, and otherwise always have the extra radiation missiles. Su-25. Alright, this is... Okay, the main reason the Su-25 is bad is because it's slow and because it's just like doesn't have afterburner, right? which kind of goes with slow. Like all of these aircraft so far that I've showed you, like Su-24, Su-24M2, MiG-29, all of these aircraft have afterburners. Obviously the UAVs don't and the cargo aircraft doesn't, but the Su-25 is an aircraft that doesn't have an afterburner, and so you've got to play these very differently. They only work in situations where you have suppressed the enemy air defense completely, and obviously enemy aircraft aren't out at the same time, and you can't really account for when enemy aircraft are going to come and attack you. So it's all just about RNG, and whilst you can, like you could argue that like it's an aircraft that can get a lot of damage done, and yeah, okay, I had a Su-25 that got like 500 points worth of kills, but how many times does that actually happen in a game? Like not very often, because it kind of requires a perfect storm in order to make the Su-25 really good. In terms of loadout, it's okay. Like you can have the KH-29 TD, which is like the two sort of long-range missiles at 4,000 meters. Those can kind of slap light units. I prefer to run it with the KH-31 because it gives you an anti-radiation to help distract enemy AA. Rockets again are bad. Fuel tank's not really needed. Then the middle pylons, like Vikir 80 gems, just not really going to cut it. Adding rockets to that's just a waste of points. KH-25 ML, probably a better choice than the Vikirs generally, just because the damage is just so much better. And the Vikir only has 11 damage, whereas the KH-25 has 20, which means that it has a much greater chance of just like bopping tanks very quickly, whereas the Vikir is only useful if you're going to make multiple runs, which is generally not very possible. You're almost always going to get countered by something after the first run. In terms of outer pylons, more rockets or different AA, and then there's also the chance to bring in the ECM pod or some short range AA. There's also the radar, which does increase the optics to 12,000. Not really that useful for a ground attack plane. The only time I could see this being useful is if you're using it specifically for a like anti-drone plane, because then you could like purposefully make this as cheap as possible. You do like R-77s, something like that. 290 points, still kind of expensive. I guess I could take these off as well. Yeah, I don't know. 240 points. You only get 2 long-range missiles. Nah, not even for that it would be worth it. So yeah, the Su-25, unfortunately, not very good in the high elo meta, but it is a fun plane to use, I guess. It is fun. It definitely is fun. I just think there are so many other things that are better. Like if you're taking motorized, you're almost always using the Su-24 M2 rather than the Su-25T. Okay, moving on to the AN-72P. This is another cargo aircraft that can drop troops. 52 troops it can drop. 7,500 lift capacity. Probably can drop like a small vehicle. In terms of guns, you can give it gun pods. If you want to do a strafing run, you can put a gun pod on it. There's also rockets you can put on it for a rocket run while you do your airdrop, and then you rocket run afterwards. Yeah, more just a meme than anything else. If you're going to use them, keep them cheap. Drop off some infantry. Alright, moving on. MiG-29. The MiG-29K, very cost-efficient fighter aircraft. 12,000 optics, great for spotting drones. 900 speeds, fantastic. 10% ECM base. And then in terms of options, you've got fuel tanks, you've got KH-30 for 5 cruise missiles. Not something I would generally recommend. This is, I think, the same cruise that is on the Catran. It's okay if it direct hits, but otherwise you're going to need like 2 to kill most things. Might be worth it if you manage to hit the mark, but it just travels so slowly, it can be intercepted quite easily. So yeah, generally people use this as air-to-air, so R77s are best. R27 ET is okay, but it can't target helicopters, so it's kind of pointless, even though it's infrared. The semi-active one may be worth using, like doing like a mix, so doing like R77, R27ER does allow you to ripple fire a little bit better. And then in terms of outer pylons, running R73s and R77s is probably the way to go, because then you can use the R73 to attack helicopters if you get air superiority at the start of the game, or if you like just throughout the game have a chance to attack helicopters. Otherwise, you can just run it with like 6 R77s or even 8 R77s. Oh, actually, no. Wait, one sec. Yeah, you can. Yeah, you can do 8 R77s, which is fine for 310 points. Sling loads of missiles at other aircraft. I like to leave mine with the capability to attack helicopters effectively, so I at least always have 2 R77 or R73s. So that would be like my recommended loadout, something like this. Yeah, 280 points. 4 R77s, 2 R73s. I mean, you can, yeah, do like 4 R73s. Oh, sorry, 2 R73s, 6 R77s for 310 points. Again, it's okay. It's an ASF. That's basically what it is. ASF stands for Air Superiority Fighter. Okay, Su-33. This is probably the most confused aircraft in the game. It's not very good at anything, really. 12,000 optics, 810 speed is not that great. It comes with a lot of like bomb loadouts and rocket loadouts. So you can set it up to have like 500 kilogram bombs like this. So 8 500 kilogram bombs. The only way that I have actually seen this be effective, which is kind of niche, actually now I think about it, is I've seen someone use it primarily as a like really cheap anti-helicopter. So it comes with like 4 R73s, and then you just use it to shoot down helicopters on your flanks and stuff. Yeah, but otherwise I just don't see the use of it. Like, sure, you can load it up with like loads of OFAB 100s. You can get 50 of them on it, which looks like a lot of bombs, but these bombs don't really do much damage. They're doing like 18, it says 18 damage, which you'd think is a lot, and it will, obviously like a carpet bomb of these things will kill infantry, but that infantry's got to be out in the open, and it's certainly not doing much damage to tanks. It's kind of slow, so, and it's dropping these at high altitude. If it had the ability to drop anything at low altitude, then it would be a lot more useful. Yeah, not sure how I feel about the Su-33. I haven't really found a loadout I enjoy. Let's move on. Alright, the Tupolev 142. It's a slow bomber. Very slow bomber. 630 speed, 6,000 optics. I think if you're going to use this, use it for cruises, because that's like the only way that you're really going to get value out of it without getting it shot down. 10,000 meter range with the KH-35s. Again, the same cruise missiles as we looked at before that I was talking about with the Catran. You got to either direct hit or double tap things. So double tap buildings, for example, because that makes them collapse. It's kind of the way to go. one 3,000 pound or 3,000 kilogram on this is just not going to work. The 6 1500s can do some damage. Then the 32 Fab 250s, again, not going to really do too much. Alright, the Tupolev 22M3. This thing is a beast. So by default, it comes with the kitchens, the KH-32. So this is a 10,000 meter range cruise missile. It has a very fast speed. So like if we compare it to the cruise missile here, the KH-35, this only has 1080 speed, whereas the KH-32 has 1800 speed, which is why people like it so much more. It's a lot harder to intercept because of that. 70 damage as well, means you basically just one pop anything you hit. Yeah, really, really solid cruise missile. The only thing that obviously is hard about cruise missiles is one, they get, well, there's two things. One is they can get shot down by radar IA, but the second is the enemy has a lot of time to react. So if they see cruise missiles coming towards them, most people move stuff. You kind of need direct hits with cruise missiles to make them worth it. So that's the only thing that I would mention regarding cruisers here. Now, other loadouts include the CAB 1500 loadout, which is pretty fun. 550 points, you get 8 of them. You're moving pretty fast when you are on afterburn, so you can demolish large areas with it. Bear in mind, using 14 CAB 1500s on the Tupolev 160 is the same cost as using 8 on the Tupolev 22, so yeah, there is that to consider. You're not really getting as much value. There's the 2 Fab 3000s, which I don't think is worth it. 8 1500s, sometimes worth it. The reason why I would say this loadout is worth it and the Fab 3000s is not, is because the Fab 1500 has enough damage to kill anything it hits. But it's also, you got more of them and it's more spread, so you're more likely to hit more targets than if you're just dropping 2 Fab 3000s, which don't really have the spread that they need to do a lot of damage. There's 24 Fab 500s, probably not worth it. The RBK 250 cluster though, very interesting loadout. I've tried this a few times and I actually kind of like it, because these are high drag bombs, so you can fly this at low altitude, do a nice long cluster bombing strike. If you played the campaign, you'll know what I'm talking about as well. And they can just ruin tanks in like a large area. So yeah, I'm actually kind of a fan of this loadout. It's great for armor spam. Like if you're finding yourself going up against a lot of US forces with loads of like Abrams and crap, and you just need something that can wipe it all out in one run, this can be that tool. You can add more. Like you can get more RBK cluster bombs here, going up to 69A. And you can also add Fab 250s here. The main use of the Tupolev 22, in my opinion, is the KH-32. That's like the main way that people use this at 400 points. And there you go. All right, moving on to the Yak-38. So the Yak-38, it is kind of useful for killing helicopters. Since it has, like, the initial loadout is triple gun pod. Like triple, was this 2 times 23 mils plus short range R60s. It's good for killing helicopters because of that. In terms of actual like ground attack, you do get an array of bombs like the RBK 250, which is a high drag bomb. You can drop it at low altitude. Same with the Fab 250 SHL. OFAB needs to be dropped at high altitude. Yeah, you can load it up with like some cluster here. But because it's only like 4 damage cluster, this can't one-shot an enemy tank, like a heavy tank, with those 4 bombs. However, if you go like the Fab 250 SHL, then maybe you can do a bit of damage to some infantry or something like that. You can also bring Incendiary, which would probably be worth it if you're dealing with infantry. And that's probably like the best 2 loadouts, so anti-helicopter or anti-infantry. The rest of these loadouts, including the rockets, are kind of pointless. So just bear that in mind. Okay, moving on to the Su-25 SM. Very similar to the Su-25T. The main difference is ECM. That's basically it. There is some difference in the loadouts as well, like what you can put on them. But there is a lot to go through here. So we've got High drag cluster, high drag HE, high drag incendiary, low drag 100s, then all the rockets. There is the KH-58 anti-radiation missile and the KH-29 TD air-to-ground missile. Again, if you're using these, I almost always recommend the anti-radiation plus whatever payload you want to bring with it. So again, incendiary cluster, low drag, high drag, HE. My favorite generally with Su-25s is like running them with some sort of like anti-radiation plus air-to-ground missiles and using them as like an anti-tank role. That's like what I like to go for more than anything else. I haven't really seen them be good for anti-infantry role just because they have to go deeper in order to get the kills, and Su-25s rarely survive. So you want to be able to make sure that you get kills before they die, and most of the time going for a bombing run with a Su-25 is just like off step too far. Same reason for the Harriers that we'll get to later as well. But you can run it with a couple of R-73s to hit aircraft or helicopters as you go past. I think my loadout would be something like this. 330 points, anti-radiation missiles, air-to-ground KH-25 MLs, plus a couple of R-73s. And that's it. Then you got the Su-27 SM. Weird aircraft, 12,000 optics, good for spotting drones again, 15% ECM with ECM pods. I think generally this is just an R-77 spamming aircraft. You just run like 8 R-77s with an R-73. It is quite expensive if you do that, so you can like drop down the amount that you have. You can even like mix in some R-27 ERs as well if you want to like ripple fire a bit more. I guess the other use is the PKB 500, which I don't know if this would be worth it running it like this. I don't think you're ever going to really be able to get the job done. Yeah. I don't know. Like 7 damage means that you need to get 3 on target to kill a heavy tank. And then Cab 500s is sort of a similar problem where like just not quite good enough for how much they cost. Yeah. My recommendation would be ECM pods plus any range of air-to-air and use it as an ASF when you're using mechanized if you don't have any other options. Moving on to the American aircraft, we start here with the AV-8B Harrier II Plus. The Harriers, they struggle with the same problem that the Su-25 has, where they don't have afterburner and they move very slow. The Harriers, though, are potentially more useful because they're generally cheaper and can still like offer quite a lot of damage on target. Like the loadout that I have in front of you here with the 4 Mavericks is a very nice one. You can even make it like completely empty for 180 points. You can see both of these are set up like that. The Harrier II Plus and the Harrier Night Attack. The Harrier II Plus is almost always worth using over the Night Attack because it has more optics for this sort of situation, because that way you might spot an enemy drone or enemy aircraft as you're making your strike. But regardless, if you do like a strafing run with this, yeah, okay, it doesn't have a gun to actually strafe, they will launch those Mavericks and they're fire and forget. So very, very nice for 180 points. Great loadout. Probably my favorite loadout for the Harrier II Plus. There is lots of stuff to go through here though. So you can have the gun plus a designation pod. You can do the ECM plus the gun. You can get just the designation pod, just the ECM, or just the gun. The ECM's probably worth considering if you're going to do ground attack, but I like to keep mine really cheap because most of the time I'm using a Harrier in a situation where I know I've shut down the enemy AA. So having ECM is kind of pointless in that situation. Designation pods, not really useful because you're not going to be able to like hover around like an area and designate your Mavericks on target. You generally, if you're going to be doing that, will have already lased something with a unit on the ground, and then you fly near it at low altitude with the Harrier to kill it. You're not going to necessarily be lasing the unit yourself with the Harrier. But bear in mind that lasing a unit with Mavericks does allow the Maverick to fire without doing a strafing run. So that can be handy in certain situations. It's just not as efficient, in my opinion, than just doing a strafing run. In terms of other options, we've got Zuni rockets. Zuni rockets look freaking cool, but unfortunately, just like all the other rockets, they are not that effective. There is also LJ-DAMs. LJ-DAM 1,000-pound bombs are basically exactly the same as the CAB 500s that the Russians get. The big problem with them is whilst you can like laser guide them on target and kill stuff, quite often you don't get that chance, and then like they're not going to be doing enough damage, not enough splash to really kill things effectively. Like a 2,000-pound JDAM is great, but the 1,000-pound JDAM is just like not as good, and sometimes just a waste of time. There is a 500-pound JDAM, again, even more of a problem. The only time that these kinds of JDAMs are useful, like the 1,000-pound and 500-pound JDAMs are useful, is on like fast stealth aircraft on the American side. Things like the F-35 can make good use of these kinds of bombs, whereas because the Harrier 2 is so slow, it's not really able to get into position unless there's like no AA whatsoever. One thing you can do with the Harrier 2 Plus, now I think about it, is you can just like make it empty like this and just have AMRAAMs on every pylon. And then you have a 6 AMRAAM Harrier 2 Plus that can trade up into aircraft at the start of a game. So say your opponent brings in like a Su-57 or a, I don't know, more likely like a MiG-29 or something is something you're going to bump into, or a Su-35. Those are the sorts of things you're actually going to be able to fire at the start because the Su-57 will have stealth. The AMRAAM has 7,000 meter range. It has terminal guidance. It means if you fire the missile, after a certain amount of time, it will track itself. So even if the Harrier dies, there's still a chance your missile is going to hit the mark. And so, yeah, this can be a very interesting, cost-efficient fighter aircraft. Not really like a fighter aircraft per se, more like an intercepting aircraft because it doesn't really dogfight very well. It doesn't have a gun or anything. But yeah, an interesting setup. Of course, you can't give it a gun, but I think if you're going to use it like this, keep it as cheap as possible with just AMRAAMs so that it always trades up if it gets a kill. Otherwise, you can add sidearms to this. Sidearms are anti-radiation missiles. So you might look at this and go, oh, this is like a really cheap anti-radiation aircraft. But the trouble is, the sidearm doesn't have much damage. So in most cases, against Russian AA, it's going to take like 2 shots to get a kill. Also, the speed of this, I believe, is a lot slower than the HARM. The HARM is 2,500 max speed. The sidearm's only like 2,160, meaning it's a lot easier to intercept. And because it's also doing less damage, it's not that effective. So sidearms are okay if you want to like just distract AA, but they're not good for actually killing AA, if you see what I mean. There is also the option to set this up as like a anti-helicopter setup, so like 205, put the gun on it, give it 4 sidewinders, and you can shoot down enemy helicopters with it. Useful for if you're being flanked a lot by enemy helicopters, but bear in mind most Russian helicopters that are flanking will also have their own AA, so yeah, because the Harrier is slow, it will get killed by that. So yeah, that's the Harrier 2 Plus. Also, 12,000 optics, very, very good. Another reason that it works well with the AMRAAMs, whereas the Night Attack only has 6,000 optics. So moving on to the Night Attack, this has bombs, where this has missiles and rockets. I guess this does also... Yeah, this is by guided munitions mostly, so like LJ-DAM, Mavericks, all guided stuff. Whereas the Night Attack has like more bombs. So you can add some like 500-pound bombs. There's also Snake Eyes. Generally, I would say for the Harriers, you want to be doing high drag bombs. You don't want to be doing like low drag bombs because you don't want to be up in the sky moving really slowly. You're going to get shot down very easily. So I would ignore all of the payloads that include like the 1,000-pound bomb, the 500-pound bomb, even like any 250 bombs. Zuni rockets is not really worth it. But Snake Eyes is always an interesting one, and also fire bombs. So I actually really like the night attack for like fire bomb loadouts with Snake Eyes. You can even run it as just like a 4 fire bomb just for melting infantry inside certain buildings. Or just like cleaning out, you know, tree lines and stuff. You could put a couple Snake Eyes on it just to help out, because you can drop the fire bombs and the Snake Eyes at the same time, but you can't drop like 1,000-pound bombs at the same time as Snake Eyes and fire bombs because they have different shell trajectories. You can set up the night attack as a Maverick plane for 180 points. Again, Hydras ignore. You can set it up as well as the Sidewinder loadout, like so. Although I think it is slightly more expensive. Yeah, in that loadout as the night attack variant, and that's kind of sad because you get less optics as well. So yeah, I wouldn't use it for that. The loadout for the night attack is generally going to be some sort of like high drag loadout. You could do it like this, where you have like a couple fire bombs, Snake Eyes, and Rock Eyes. Quite expensive though. Yeah, maybe don't do that. I think, yeah, firebomb loadout is okay. Keep the outer pylons empty, 205 points. Firebomb, Snake Eyes. Yeah, that's kind of how I would use the night attack Harrier. The Harrier 2+ really strong. I say really strong. Strong in comparison. Right, then we have the Prowler. The Prowler is the sort of go-to seed aircraft on the American side when you don't have access to the F-16 CJ. It comes by default with 2 harms. You can add 2 more harms, and for the most part I would just recommend beefing it out with as many harms as you can. There is one of my decks where I run it with like ECM and harm, because I can't fit it in the deck for the extra 5 points, which sounds silly but is the case. So yeah, that is one reason I would maybe like downgrade it, or do like fuel tank with harm, something like that. 215 points. But yeah, generally getting as many harms as possible is a good option. You want to be able to overwhelm enemy air defense with anti-radiation missiles, and that's what you got to do with the Prowler. You got to brute force it, and the reason for that is because it's slow, and yeah, it doesn't have afterburner. So you want to be able to overwhelm the enemy AA and get out of there whilst you still can. So just fire those missiles and leave. That would be the recommendation there. 10% ECM is okay. Yeah, just slow. When these come out, if you're playing as Russia, just bring out a fighter and shoot them down, because they're very, very vulnerable to ASF. Right, the F-18C Hornet. It's really interesting how this default comes with Zuni rockets, actually. Never use Zunis on this. This aircraft is primarily a fighter aircraft. So ignore the bombs, like 2,000-pound bombs, 1,000-pound bombs. Feel free to try them, of course, if you're new to the game, but you'll find that they're not very effective. Rockets aren't that effective in general. The main way that you use the F-18 here is for air-to-air. So AMRAAM Sparrows, there is like Gunslinger, AMRAAM Sparrow. So Gunslinger's long range, AMRAAM's like medium range, Sparrow's sort of shorter range. And then there's Sidewinders, which are shortest range, but can also target helicopters. So by default, the F-18C comes with 2 Sidewinders, so there's no point in ever adding more Sidewinders. But the main decision you've got to make here is, do you want 4 Gunslingers, which would then be quite expensive, the 370 points for 4 long-range missiles. It's actually not as expensive as something like the Su-35, so probably worth having, especially sort of in the mid-game where you want to shoot down enemy drones and keep enemy aircraft at a distance. Like the value of long-range AA becomes greater throughout the game because there is more radar-based AA on the map as the game progresses, generally speaking. So being able to engage enemy aircraft from further away is nice, because it means you don't have to put yourself into the enemy AA net. So loadouts like this can be very handy in those situations. When it comes to like this aircraft though, I do like to mix it up, like run a couple Sparrows, run a couple AMRAAMs, have a gunslinger in there, maybe something like this even. Yeah, so you have basically a big mix. So a couple gunslingers, 4 AMRAAMs, 2 Sparrows, 2 Sidewinders. And the reason that you'd run it like this is because it basically gives you like the ability to ripple. You can even make it a bit cheaper, like 330 points, something like this. You have 4 different types of missiles. So as you progressively get closer to the enemy, when you're moving into the furball, especially at the start of the game, it can continuously fire and get lots of different types of missiles off. Yeah, I think my favorite loadout is the double gunslinger, probably. Especially since I've really started to value like long-range missiles more throughout games than just like trying to win the early game. Like the early game in this game doesn't matter that much. So if you win or lose the air battle, it's not a big deal unless you lose a lot of ground with it, which generally isn't the case regardless. F-18D, let's move on to the ground attack variant. So this is like the single seater, this is the twin seater, and this is used for primarily ground attack. So you can give it designation pod if you want. Most of the time I think giving designation pods to aircraft is a waste of points. You can have AMRAAMs or not, a Sparrow or not. Then you go to the payloads. So inner and outer pylons. So inner pylons, LJDAM 1000s, LJDAM 500s. Most of the time I would say just ignore these because this aircraft doesn't have stealth, so it's not able to utilize them very well. You have to get pretty deep to use these effectively, and your F-18 is going to get killed. The other thing to bear in mind is the F-18D only has 120 seconds of fuel, whereas the Hornet's 180. So the F-18C, sorry. So yeah, the D has much less fuel, so bear that in mind. Very important for when you're doing airstrikes. So yeah, Firebomb, great. Snake Eye, okay. Rock Eye, okay. The reason this is only okay is because it's only a 500 pound. This is like the equivalent to a 250 kilogram cluster. So it's only doing what, like 4 damage? And then there's Mavericks. So my favorite loadouts for the Hornets, generally speaking, is Maverick loadout. It's pretty cool and pretty fun. Like running it as a cheap Maverick. Because it can afterburn, it's like a lot sort of safer, generally speaking, than the Harriers at doing Maverick runs. I also like running it as a Firebomb plus cluster loadout, something like this, where you have 4 firebombs for a cluster, or you just run it as like an 8 cluster for 305 points to make sure that you have enough damage on target. So that's like all high drag, so you're bombing at low altitude if you're using the Rockeye or if you're using the Firebomb. You might have also noticed the Slam ER here. This is a 10,000 meter range cruise missile with 40 damage. Same as it's basically the same stats as the like Catran cruise missile, or like the cruise missile we've seen on the other side. With 40 damage, it's not that good. It moves really slow, very easy to intercept, and where you've only got 2 of them, it's not that useful. So yeah, makes it very expensive. Probably not worth using. I think 8 Rockeyes or 4 Rockeyes plus Firebombs is the way to go with this aircraft. Snake Eye is not really worth it on its own. Like if you ran like double Snake Eye, something like this, 265 points. I don't know how I feel about that. Yeah. Anyway, the plane by default comes with 2 Sidewinders, so you've got those for dealing with enemy aircraft. Pop a couple of AMRAAMs on it, maybe 305 points. Yeah. I don't really use the F-18D Hornet very much anymore. But yeah, the loadouts I was talking about before are the ones I would recommend. F-35B. So now we're getting into some of the American stealth aircraft. You'll notice that these are very stealthy. So 1.75 stealth. The Su-57 is only 1.25 stealth. So it is a little bit stealth, but it's not as stealth as something like the F-35. And this is where like a lot of payloads can come in very handy. So the nice thing about the F-35 is I think all of its loadouts are very good. So you got the Stormbreaker loadout, where you'd run like 6 Stormbreakers. This is good for if your drones spotted a bunch of enemy units, and then you just pop 2 Stormbreakers on each of the enemy units on the back line. So like put 2 on a Qualitzaya, put 2 on an Ante, put 2 on a Favorite, and then bam, they're all dead. And you, even if your F-35 gets shot down, then you've made value by getting those 3 kills. So that's what the Stormbreakers are used for. Double JSO loadout. Great for crippling tanks that are coming your way, especially if you're being blobbed by like T-15s or T-14s, like those kinds of things. Mainly T-15s, like Barbarous would be the great target for JSOs. If like you see like 2 of them, or even 3 of them if you're lucky, relatively close together, dropping a couple JSOs on them won't kill them, but it will severely damage them and potentially mobility kill them, which would then allow you to kill them in other ways. So that's what the JSOs are useful for. Yeah, like whilst 2 doesn't do enough damage to kill anything, like heavy tank wise, you need 3 JSOs to kill anything in the game. 2 is not enough. So yeah, it's mainly just for crippling targets. JDAM loadout, again, really good for diving into the back line and dropping a couple of bombs on like soft targets. Has a lot more sort of capacity to kill something that's a bit more armored. And then you've got the 500 pound, but I feel like the 500 pound here is kind of redundant just because it's just a worse LJDAM. Yeah, it costs a lot less, but you're not really going to be able to kill anything to get the value back on the plane. Then there's the AMRAAM variant, which gives you 4 AMRAAMs. This can be very useful because like it can just hover in your backline and the enemy won't even know it's there. But as soon as an enemy aircraft comes in, you already got an aircraft in the sky that can take down enemy aircraft quite easily. I say easily. It will take a little while for the AMRAAMs to get on target, but either way, an extra AMRAAM here or there is really handy for when like you're using Pack 3s and stuff like that, because the Pack 3 won't ever one-shot an enemy aircraft, whereas if you've got like an F-35 also firing an AMRAAM at said aircraft, then you're likely to pick up those kills more often, which is nice. It also comes with 20% ECM base, which does help it survive in some situations. You got 12,000 optics for if you need it to shoot down drones. Like in a America versus America matchup, that's very useful. We have the Harvest Hawk, which is the first of the cargo planes on the American side. This is the KC-130. It has 20,000 weight limit with 64 seats. It can be loaded with Griffin missiles and also Hellfires and Stormbreakers. Generally, I would avoid putting any munitions on this and keep it as cheap as possible for 175 points, but it is fun to mess around with the Griffin missiles. The Griffin missiles are like on the back, I believe, like on the ladder or in the back of the aircraft. So as you fly over something, it will start firing them, or maybe they're like underneath. I'm not actually entirely sure. Regardless, I think you need to fly over the enemy to make use of them. And then Hellfires are on the wing, I'm pretty sure. Yeah, they're there. And then the Stormbreakers are also there. Yeah, anyway, keep it standard. Don't really mess around with it, otherwise it just becomes really expensive. Okay, moving on to the airborne. We've got the the A10C. Good old A10 Thunderbolt. The A10 Thunderbolt, it's okay. The main reason it's good is because it can carry a decent payload of Mavericks. So it can be very good for ground attack with that loadout. Like even if you just run it like 235 points with 6 air-to-ground Mavericks, it's okay. And the reason it's good is because it does actually get armor. So like the Su-25, you get 15 armor, which basically is a sort of number that just reduces damage. Like on aircraft and helicopters, armor just reduces damage. It doesn't mean like 15 millimeters of armor or anything like that. It's just a flat like bonus to damage reduction. So 20 health as well, 5% ECM. This is like my preferred loadout for the A10, but there is a lot of stuff you can put on it. You can bring 4 2,000-pound JDAMs, which would be pretty crazy. 230 points, honestly. 56 damage bomb. I haven't messed around with it, but maybe it could work. I think if you're going to do that, do it with £2,000. Don't do it with £500. That seems pointless. High drag cluster. It just seems okay. I mean, you're getting 5 £1,000 cluster bombs, which are decent damage. There's 13 snake eye loadout. The normal £500 bomb loadout, which is I would definitely not recommend because you need to be at high altitude to drop those. And then there's the Hydra rockets, which again I would not recommend because rockets aren't that good at the moment. 80 gems, like how many do you want basically. There is the ECM pods and the AIM-9s, and then the designation pod. I'd be tempted to try the £2,000 variant of this aircraft. But ultimately, I think that the 6 Maverick variant is better overall. Just put it on a strafing run and let it rip. Moving on to the B-1B. This is the nuke bomber for the American side. There is actually 2 nuke bombers on the American side. This is the first, the B-1B. It comes default with 24 JASSMs, which are actually reasonably good cruise missiles. They're actually very good cruise missiles. 60 damage, 10,000 meter range. The damage is what makes them good, not the speed. Like the speed is pretty low, but because you get so many of them here, again, you've got to kind of do what I was talking about with the Tupolev 160, where you fire like 4 or 5 of them, and then you turn back towards the base, and then set up 5 more, let them fire, keep turning it back. It works really well on like a large map. On a shorter map, it's probably going to get shot down, or like someone's going to dive it with a helicopter to kill it, or not a helicopter, an enemy like ASF will just come and dive you. So be careful using aircraft that are expensive with high payloads, especially like cruise missiles, because it takes ages to fire them all. But yeah, here's the nuke. The nuke's a free fall bomb. The B-1B can afterburn, so yeah, it can be a pretty fast bomber to get into position. And yeah, you just drop that bomb on them. I think American nukes are a lot more reliable than Russian nukes because they can't be intercepted. So something to consider there. But make sure that you're supporting. If you're ever going to use a nuke, make sure your team supports you with seed and other aircraft to kill enemy air defense whilst you're trying to drop the nuke on the enemy. Very important, otherwise you're just wasting points. My favorite loadout for the B-1B, the AGM-86 LCM, big old air launch cruise missile, 80 damage, quite slow, but in a situation where you have good seed, these can be very, very effective. So works well with Striker, like airborne Striker, where you've got F-16 CJs. That's probably my favorite combination. And when I would use a B-1B with these air launch cruise missiles. There's a £2,000 bomb variant, very fun, but limited in effectiveness. I mean, it really depends. Like if you get a good bombing strike in the right direction. For 500 points, like 24 £2,000 bombs is a lot. Then you got the 12 £1,000 JSOs as well. These are, again, good for crippling enemy tanks. You need 3 of them to kill. You get 12. So you could technically target like 4 different heavy tanks. If you kill them all, well worth it actually. There's also the cluster. This is high drag for 450 points. This is quite a cumbersome aircraft. Doing quite a long range or a long distance high drag cluster drop is kind of risky to say the least for 450 points, especially since you're not like guaranteed kills. Like I think the JSO variant is generally going to be more useful, and then the Snake Eye variant's not really going to be doing any damage. Unless you're hitting infantry on the ground in the open, it's not going to kill anything. I guess it might kill like I don't know, radar AA or like light units in the back line, but yeah, that's about it. We got the C-130. So the C-130, it just is bigger than the Harvest Hawk. 92 seats, 23,000 weight, which means you can probably fit like an extra Humvee or 2 in there. But yeah, still slow, Still a big boy. We got an even bigger boy here, the Globe Master. Oh yeah. Biggest of boys on the American side. So this is like the equivalent to the IL-76. The IL-76 does have more seats, but the Globe Master has more weight capacity. So you can drop more vehicles with the Globe Master than you can on the Russian side with the IL-76. But you've only got 102 seats, 10% ECM. Actually moves pretty fast as well, 630 speed. For like a cargo aircraft is pretty good. I have really enjoyed doing airdrops with the Globe Master. F-15C Eagle. Really solid ASF. It's relatively cheap for what it offers, and I see a lot of people using them. 12,000 optics, great for spotting enemy aircraft and drones. We've got 5% ECM, and then you can just load it however you want with AMRAAMs, basically, and also Sidewinders. So we could go like Sparrows, AMRAAMs, something like that is a nice loadout for dealing with enemy aircraft, just because you can, you know, fire both. You can just do like 6 AMRAAMs plus 2 Sidewinders for 300 points. This is usually the go-to for a lot of people, I think. Can make it cheaper. Like if you go like 250 points for 6 AMRAAMs, and it just becomes an ASF. You can like reduce the fuel tanks on it as well even. If you make it cheap, like 230 points, and then just have 2 of these, actually pretty good ASF, just for helping control the skies. I don't know if I'd rather do like 4 AMRAAMs, 2 Sidewinders though, just so that at least I can engage enemy helicopters if I need to. It's something you've got to work out yourself really, when you're using them. I think my main loadout that I would use is like I said, the 6 AMRAAM, 2 Sidewinders, and then maybe just take the fuel off. So 280 points. It's a nice loadout. Alright, Strike Eagle. Probably one of the best high drag clusters in the game, apart from like the Su-24. The Su-24 is really, really good high drag cluster, but the Strike Eagle, pretty good as well. The main way I like to load this out is put 6 CBU clusters on the center line, and then run the cheap 500-pound JDAMs, fuel tanks, cheap ASF loadout, and then empty. So for 320 points, you get a 6 cluster aircraft, which is pretty nice, especially since they're high drag, they can drop at low altitude. Got 10% ECM, it's 810 speed, like plus afterburner. Like it's very, very nice. Otherwise, like the LJDAM, not really worth it. Like you can run like a 5 LJDAM, but it becomes so expensive. I mean, it would be cool if it like did a lot of damage, but generally I find like trying to use JDAMs on aircraft that don't have stealth is it's just so risky these days, especially because like on the American side, people will spam PAC-2s, so that will shoot down the Russian aircraft, and on the like if you're using Strike Eagles, you got to worry about all the S-300s that will one-shot you. So yeah, it gets very expensive when you start to look at all of the LJDAMs. So I think cluster loadout's the best one here, like using the dumb bombs again, like the 2,000 pound or the 500 pound here. It's not worth it because you have to be high up. Yeah. So it goes the same for the fuselage. Same for the wing pylons. Again, don't really need to use these. I have seen people go like this, where you have like 7 2,000 pound bombs and you just do a bombing run with them. I have seen people use it, but I just don't see it do much damage. Like 26 500 pound high altitude bombing run. Yeah, and it's not going to do much damage unless it catches infantry in the open or light vehicles in the open. So yeah, I would stick to high drag generally with the Strike Eagle. You can do plenty of cluster with these, but the reason I'm making this as cheap as possible on the fuselage is because it's the only one that you have to have an armament, basically. So you make that as cheap as possible, and then you can have 6 cluster instead of just 4. Because you can do it like this, where you go like 275 points for 4 cluster. But having 4 cluster is really risky, Like having 6 gives you that redundancy to make sure that all 4 actually hit the target and kill something. Yeah, favorite loadout, 6 cluster, 4 LJDAM 500s. In a situation where there's like no AA, you could get away with dropping the LJDAMs afterwards. But yeah, ultimately it's just a cluster high drag plane. Alright, EX Eagle. Now this is an interesting one because the EX Eagle has a couple loadouts that I think people like. One loadout that's really expensive is 3 JASSAMs plus harms, and then you just go cheap on your AA, maybe like AMRAMs, something like that, for 500 points. And the way that this works is you're firing your JASSAMs, right? And you're targeting like enemy AA or whatever you want really with the JASSAM. And then the harms obviously like taking care of enemy radar AA at the same time. And what you can do is if you've like had a drone up and you spotted a bunch of like AA positions, is you can fire the JASSAMs at the AA as well. They will like attempt to intercept those, but you're obviously already firing harms at them as well because they've got to have the radar on to intercept the JASSAM. If they don't have the radar on, then the JASSAM gets through and kills them anyway, right? So it's a nice sort of like multi-attack thing to do with the EX Eagle, and I have seen people enjoy using these. I personally don't use it that way. I don't tend to have anything on the center line. You can put JSOs here, so you can run like a 3 JSO aircraft with harms, which can be kind of nice because, again, as I mentioned before, the JSO needs 3 to kill, and since you have 3, you know, you can pop an Armata or a T-15 very easily with these, but you are still looking at a very expensive aircraft because of its 15% ECM. There is Stormbreakers, there is the LJDAMs, but again, because you don't have stealth, using LJDAMs is very risky, especially on a plane like this, which is already very expensive. There is loads of Stormbreakers, but you can set this up with absolutely tons of Stormbreakers. But yeah, generally speaking, not going to be that useful. Just very, very difficult to micro 28 Stormbreakers. Bear in mind you've got to click like 28 times to use them, I think. Yeah, anyway, my favorite loadout, the loadout, I wouldn't say my favorite, but the loadout I use the most, this outer pylon is just a combination, by the way, of AMRAMs and AIM-9s and whatever you'd want to rather get. But I like to run 4 AMRAMs, 2 Seed, and 4 AMRAMs there, empty. Actually, no, I run this, sorry. So 6 AMRAMs, 2 Sidewinders, 2 anti-radiation missiles as like an air-to-air platform. It's quite expensive, but it does give you that sort of multi-role capability, being able to attack radar whenever you're shooting stuff down in the sky. The JASSAM one is probably the most fun, probably my favorite personally. The rest, it's really up to you. Like, don't, just because I say something is bad doesn't mean don't try it. Because honestly, it might not be bad, and maybe there's some stuff that I haven't tried fully, and there's always going to be shifts in the meta where things become like more sort of viable, especially if they buff certain things in certain ways. So there you go. Yeah, the other thing that to note actually as we continue, the reason that like something like an LJDAM £2,000 is so hard to use is because they have a 4-second aim time. So yeah, that's why people don't like using them so much. Anyway, Grey Eagle. It's a drone with 4,500 optics. We're back to UAVs here. Comes default with Hellfire missiles. You can't take them off or anything, so you just got 110 point sort of UAV with Hellfires. You can also put stingers on it. I don't think I've ever seen people use these for stingers, but it's kind of an interesting concept. Griffin missile is probably the most useless because yeah, it targets like infantry and vehicles, 70mm explosive. Because they're not laser guided, it's not going to hit the top armor too often. Yeah, not going to be doing that much damage. But Stinger AA could be kind of fun. And then you got the Hellfires. Hellfire is probably going to be the most useful, generally speaking, because you can laser them onto different things, and it does have a laser on it. But then you have the Global Hawk, which is the big boy, the big UAV. And the Global Hawk's fantastic. 5,500 optics, 3,200 low altitude, and 2,000 high altitude. It's just good. It spots everything at a distance, like very, very far away. And it can even be used for spotting snipers in your backline just because its ground optics is so high. So even if you're looking at like dividing that by 3 and then dividing that number by 2 again because of like forest, you're still going to have a decent chance to spot things on the ground with the Global Hawk. Most of the time people don't really bring the Grey Eagle because of the Global Hawk. So yeah, just that extra optics there, the extra 1,000 optics is so huge. It's also faster, as you can see. 450 speed, 270 speed. So yeah, Global Hawk good. Make sure you use it. Alright, down to the Striker Cavalry Regiment. We've got the B-52 Stratofortress. This, by default, comes with 12 ALCMs. It can carry a lot of stuff. 700 points, 12 air-launched cruise missiles. It's okay. It's not like as good as the Lancer. Like the Lancer, I like because it's 600 points for 8, and then you've also got like afterburner capability and stuff. Whereas this is just like a big chonky boy that's very easy to shoot down if it gets too close to enemy AA, because there's no like afterburner or anything to get it out of trouble. And it has to stay at high altitude as well, whereas the B1B doesn't. So anyway, the B-52 with 12 air-launched cruise missiles, you can add even more, make it 20. You can also put 500-pound bombs on. 500-pound bombs, kind of useless. Looks cool, but kind of useless. On the wing pylons, yeah, you can put ALCMs, you can put JASSMs. JASSMs are slightly cheaper because they do less damage, but they are slightly faster as a missile, so probably a better loadout overall. Then we got the 12 JSOs, again 3 per target. If you get the kills, then maybe it's worth it, but probably going to get shot down before it gets close to the front. 18 2,000-pound JDAMs, same problem, and again 2,000-pound bombs. Any sort of bomb loadout on a big slow bomber, usually going to get popped by a couple shots from an Ante or a S300 in general just before they get close to the front, like an S250. It does have a designation pod, probably not going to be that useful. A designation pods would be useful if you could have like multiple lasers coming out of them, but when you're like only lasing one thing at a time, it's kind of like not ideal, because that means you have to stay in the air as you continuously drop more payload, and so it doesn't really work out. Anyway, Striker Cavalry Regiment does get access to all of the F-16s, and these are fantastic. 810 speed. This Fighting Falcon has 6 rock eyes, which is good. It's got snake eyes as well, and then AMRAAMs. This loadout's actually okay for 290 points. I actually kind of like it. You can do 10 rock eyes if you want to just make sure you've got enough cluster to kill everything. Again, they're still 500-pound cluster, but because you've got more of them, you've got more chance to kill stuff. I wouldn't really recommend doing any low drag bombs, so like 2,000 pounds or 500-pound bombs, which are like normal bombs, because it means you have to be high altitude. Snake eyes or rock eyes are the way to go with the inner pylons, or just fuel tanks. And then the middle pylon, again, ignore the normal bombs. You're taking Mavericks or Snake Eyes or Rock Eyes. And my favorite loadout for the Fighting Falcon is fuel tanks, Mavericks, AMRAAMs. That's the way to go. 300 points. Maybe I usually put the ECM on for 340 points. And then yeah, the Mavericks just absolutely slamming units on the ground. Really, really nice payload for 340 points. But yeah, don't neglect the rock eye payload either. Like 10 rock eyes, even just like 6 rock eyes with some extra AMRAAMs or something is also a pretty nice loadout. You can maybe put a couple Mavericks on there even. Mix it up a bit. Fighting Falcon, really, really cool aircraft. Really good. F-16CJ, another fantastic aircraft. It comes by default with 2 anti-radiation missiles. So it always has 2 harms. You can add 2 more harms, and I would almost always recommend doing so. There's no real reason to run ECM pods instead of harms, because the harms are distracting the AA that are shooting at you anyway. and fuel tanks is pointless because the outer pylons don't really offer anything substantial. So unless you're running like an America versus America game, like fuel tanks could be useful because you might want something to loiter to kill drones, but otherwise ignore that and just go for 4 harms because that is the way to do it. And then in terms of outer pylons, yeah, I usually run 2 AMRAAMs. I never really run a mix of them. You can run 4 AMRAAMs, but yeah, it does make it more expensive. And 315 points for 4 harms with like an afterburner aircraft is insanely good. Really good value aircraft right now. Probably will get nerfed at some point. Then we have the F-16B Viper. Viper is actually like crazy good because it has the F-16 agility and then it has like decent payload. So you can run like 4 JSOs on this, which is again 3 required to hit the mark in order to kill heavy tank. So it's a little bit off. Like I kind of wish you could run 3 for like a slightly less price. That would be nice. But yeah, you get 4 of them. It means you can spread them around a little bit more. You can just kind of create, as long as you create a Venn diagram that kills the one thing that you want, you can actually spread them quite well. There is the £2,000 JDAM. JDAM is pretty good on the F-16 Viper in my opinion, just because you can put like a designation pod on it and then just like bop stuff. But I don't know, like £2,000 JDAMs, I'm trying to get used to using them. I struggle, I really do. And because the F-16 Viper again doesn't have stealth, it struggles to get like close enough before it gets shot down. Especially if the enemy has like radar AA that's like not turned on, that's further forward. Sometimes it can just catch you out and then you lose at a Viper, which is costing loads of money. Because Vipers are inherently quite expensive because of the payloads that they offer. I don't think the 16 Stormbreaker loadout's really worth it, but maybe there's a way to like launch multiple Stormbreakers at once at each target and then it would become worth it. If it wasn't so micro intensive, it would be worth it. Running fuel tanks plus 2 £2,000 bombs, again, I don't know. Viper's not really one I've figured out yet. I don't really have a favourite payload. I was running it for a long time with the 4 JSOs. Now I run it with the LJ dams, just trying to make it work. Maybe one day I'll be using it with the Stormbreakers. Anyway, choose what kind of air-to-air you want. I have seen people run these as air-to-air. That is actually something worth noting. Really cheap and like air-to-air. Like even just like 6 AMRAAM with fuel, 275 points. Maybe even ECM pod. I don't know if the ECM pod would be worth it. I mean, that's even cheaper actually if you take off the designation pod. Then you can make them like 4 AMRAAMs for 275 points plus ECM, 230 without. Yeah, you can make this like a really cheap ASF. That's crazy. But especially considering like how maneuverable it is. I'm moving on to the Predator. 4,000 optics, it's okay. Comes with Hellfires, can put Stingers on it, can put Griffin missiles. The only reason you would put Stingers on drones, like whilst this is kind of interesting for killing enemy helicopters or something on the flanks, I think the range is just not good enough, right? 2,000 meters is just never gonna get the job done, especially since it's only 1,500 against high altitude targets. That's planes. I don't see it. I don't see it happening. Most of the time, I'd just keep it on Hellfires and use it at 85 points. Then we have the RQ Shadow for 50 points. It's the same as like the Corsair and the Forepost in terms of like its capabilities. It's just not that good. All right, moving on to the Special Operations Forces. We got the AC-130. Oh yeah. I'm sure most of you who have played Broken Arrow for a little while will know about the AC-130 strat at the start of the game, where you like rush the enemy spawn with AC-130s and cap the entire map and win the game. That's basically what they're good for. If they are used anywhere else in the game, they kind of suck. The Spooky 2 is 460 points. can get value, but it requires good teamwork in order to get value. I guess in situations where like there's an enemy breakthrough and maybe they don't have enough AA supporting it, then you might be able to get some like good kills with this. But yeah, in terms of port side and starboard side pylons, you can add HE Hellfires and you can add Stormbreakers. You can also add Griffin missiles. Griffin missiles are fired out the back again. Generally, I think like the Hellfire is the better choice, because the Stormbreaker, you need to be basically like right over the enemy in order to use them efficiently. So most of the time you just keep it empty because it's 160 points if you do that. 15% ECM. The one thing that I wish the Spooky had would just be like more flares. That would actually make it useful for longer. Alright, the B2 Spirits. The Stealth Bomber, 1.75 stealth with a nuke. Yeah, it's good. It's very good. 20% ECM, 1,000 points. Really, really solid aircraft. I honestly feel like they need to make American nukes more expensive because they are so much better than Russian nukes, because you can't intercept their bombs. You can intercept the aircraft, but most of the time the aircraft gets through before the bomb drops, like almost always. In terms of other payloads, 16 JASSMs is fun, but again it requires like a lot of micro and time at the back of the map. You have to like fire, you know, I don't know, you could probably get away with firing 8, turning it back, firing another 8, actually maybe not. Probably do like 4 to 6 at a time. Yeah, probably better. Turn it back to the edge of the map, fire another bunch and keep doing that. There is a 30,000 pound bombs. They look cool as hell, but they don't really do much damage. Like the blast radius on these is just not good enough. That's all I'll say generally. If they direct hit something, sure it dies, but it has to direct hit. Then we got the 16 LJDAM. If you just want to wipe a sector, that's fun. You've got the JSO loadout. I have seen the JSO loadout used really well, because again, it takes 3 to kill a tank, right? And you have 16, so you can target like 5 tanks. So if there's a lot of heavy armor, a B2 Spirit coming out for 500 points, it can get close to the target because of the stealth. And before you know it, like entire tank pushes are just wiped out in one go. 2,000 pound bombs. Unfortunately, B2 Spirit a bit too slow to make good use out of the bombs. Like a long bombing strikes, that is. Tactical nuke is really the way to go with the B2 Spirit, or the JSOs, in my opinion. I've seen the JSOs used really well on this thing. Then we've got the F-117 Nighthawk. Or if I'm like saying the names or like the numbers wrong, as the like the Americans say the numbers really strange. This has the option to have the Stormbreaker, the JASSM, the JSO, the JDAMs. The only viable one I feel like is the JASSM. Because the Nighthawk is slow and doesn't have like the ability to afterburn, as soon as it drops any payload it dies. So you could argue like, oh, why don't you just like, you can drop like Stormbreakers for 150. You might be able to like sneak it around the edge of the map, try and drop the payload onto the enemy like AA before it turns on, but if the AA is turned on, it's going to get spotted before it drops the Stormbreakers and it's going to die. Simple as that. So it's very much better off used as a standoff with the JASSM. And yeah, it's a decent plane for launching these. Then we have the F-22 Raptor. The Raptor is a stealth fighter. Very decent aircraft. 20% ECM. By default comes with AMRAAMs. You can put JATMs on it. The AIM 260 has that 9,000 meter range, 440 points for long-range missiles. Can be a reasonable loadout, honestly. Have seen people use it. I am more of a fan of running like 4 AMRAAMs, two AIM 260 JATMs, and then 2 Sidewinders, just so you have that little bit of a ripple effect if you're ever going in for a dogfight. But standoff with the JATMs works nicely. You can also load this up with JSOs. Again, it's only 2 though, so it's not ideal. You can do Stormbreakers, which is a fun loadout with the Raptor, because it's really fast, so you can get in and out much more efficiently than you can with an F-35, because this is 900 speed. The F-35B, for example, is 810 speed, and the F-35A is the same. So this gets a bonus of the speed, and that does make a big difference when trying to get away from those missiles. 2 1,000-pound bombs is also kind of fun as well. So you can use it as an air-to-ground. The big problem I find with doing that, like using the Raptor as an air-to-ground aircraft, is you sacrifice the ability to have an air-to-air aircraft in those particular decks. Anyway, moving on to the F-35A. We're still sitting with the stealth. Still got the 20% ECM. F-35A, it's very similar to the F-35B, it can just carry more payload. So in terms of stats, you'll see that they're more or less identical. Same optics, same speed, same ECM, F-35A and F-35B. But the F-35A can carry more payload. So you can carry like 2,000-pound JDAMs, you can carry even the JSM cruise missiles. JSM cruise missiles, probably not a great loadout for 350 points, just because it's kind of expensive. Like if you consider that you can fire 2 JASSMs out of a Nighthawk for 300, this is just expensive. You can run it as an anti-radiation aircraft, which some people do. Because of its stealth, you can hold fire on this and then move closer and then unleash it. You've got the Stormbreaker loadout, which then gives you 8 Stormbreakers instead of 6 Stormbreakers. And then of course, yeah, 2,000-pound JDAMs is the big one. Just because, yeah, lots of damage. Alright, JSOs is, yeah, it's another option. My favourite option generally for the F-35s, both of the F-35s, is always going to be Stormbreakers, because you're able to sneak through and pop those soft targets on the back line after your drone spot things. That's what those are used for. The harm loadout is also useful if you don't have any other anti-radiation aircraft available to you. It can become your anti-radiation aircraft for 310 points. Yeah, that's kind of the options there. If you got more of these 500-pound JDAMs, it would be worth maybe bringing them instead of the 2,000-pound, but yeah, things can get very expensive with the F-35s, especially if you're just like YOLOing them into enemy AA. So keeping them cheap with the Stormbreakers and tapping things on the back line is the way that I like to use them. MC-130, it is another cargo plane. It comes with 20% ECM, so it's basically just a better half-stalk. That's basically all there is to it. Then we have the Reaper. This is a 4,500 meter ground optic drone, UAV. It can either come with the JDAMs, 500-pound JDAMs, or the Hellfire AT. I think generally you just bring it with Hellfire AT and then nothing else is okay. You can load that with Stingers. You can even give it some Sidewinders. I didn't realize you can give it Sidewinders, that's crazy. I mean, Sidewinders are decent because they are able to one-shot US helicopters. So in situations where you're US versus US, having a couple Sidewinders on these on the flanks is kind of huge. Find and kill a Comanche in one shot. But otherwise, yeah, Stinger's not good because of its high altitude range. It's only 1,500, but again, killing helicopters could be okay, but then you've only got 8 damage, so it needs 2 shots on target. The main thing about this is it's a UAV. It's not that fast, but it's still good optics. And then you have the Sentinel, and this is just, yeah, the mother of all drones. Stealthed drone, 1.75 stealth. Never going to break that stealth because it has no weapons. 4,500 optics. This needs to be more expensive or have less optics range. One of the two, in my opinion. It needs some sort of nerf because it is exceptionally strong as a recon unit. And basically what you do is you bring one of these out and then you drop the Stormbreakers on anything you see in the back line. That's how the Stormbreakers are used. It's always in combination with a drone like this. Alright, well that basically sums up everything, I think. I probably missed a bunch of stuff. I'm sure there's plenty of tips that you guys can give in the comments regarding air tactics and certain payloads that you like on your different aircraft. But yeah, that has been a marathon, certainly, for this one. So hopefully you guys have appreciated that. I haven't done it for a long time because I've been suffering with migraines lately, but we got there in the end. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Goodbye.